Hello, and welcome to The Explainer. You know, we've all walked through a grassy field, but have you ever stopped to think about what you're really looking at? Today, we're diving into the secret life of grasslands. And trust me, they are so much more complex and way more important than you might think. Let's get into it.
So take a look at this. You probably see a field, right? Some grass, a few flowers here and there. It feels familiar, simple even. But what our sources for this explainer show is that this seemingly ordinary view, well, it hides a really deep and fascinating story.
Because what you're actually looking at is an incredibly intricate, living habitat. It's like a historical record written in plants. And right now, it's an ecosystem that's in real trouble. So let's start peeling back the layers.
Okay, first things first. To really get this, we need to be clear on what we're talking about. What is it that actually turns a simple patch of green into a proper grassland habitat? Well, officially, a grassland is any area where grasses are the main event. But, and this is key, they're not performing solo. They're part of this whole community of other plants, things like sedges and rushes, and a huge variety of non-grassy herbs, which botanists have a name for, forbs.
All right, now this is where it gets really surprising. The richest, most biodiverse grasslands we have in places like the UK, they aren't what you'd call wild at all. In fact, they have been profoundly shaped by people. And that brings us to this absolutely crucial difference. On one hand, you've got what's called unimproved grassland. Think of this as the original species-rich powerhouse, buzzing with wildflowers created by centuries of gentle farming. And on the other hand, you have improved grassland. This is a modern invention, heavily fertilized, often just a single type of grass, all designed for high-yield agriculture. The difference in life between them is just immense. This whole idea kind of turns our concept of natural right on its head, doesn't it? Most of these treasured grasslands are what ecologists call semi-natural. They were first created way back, something like 6,000 years ago, when farmers started clearing forests. And all that amazing biodiversity you find there, it's a direct result of continuous low-key management, grazing animals, cutting hay once a year. In fact, if we just left them alone, they'd be covered in shrubs and trees in about 50 years.
So this human-shaped history makes these places incredibly valuable, but it also makes them incredibly vulnerable. And honestly, the scale of what we've lost is just staggering.
So why do they matter so much?
Well, for starters, these species-rich grasslands are biodiversity hotspots. They're home to amazing wildflowers, rare fungi like the vibrant waxcaps, and just countless insects, birds, and other animals. In fact, our sources show they support a full fifth of all the UK's top priority conservation species. They're also vital service stations for our struggling pollinators, like bees and butterflies. And on top of all that, they're living history books, cultural landscapes shaped over thousands of years.
Right. So given all that value, the wildlife, the history, the sheer beauty, the next slide is a really tough one to look at. 97%. Just let that sink in. Since the 1930s, that is how much of the UK's species-rich grassland has been lost. Most of it was plowed up for intensive farming. It's basically an almost total wipeout of an entire habitat. And this chart here just makes that number brutally clear. Imagine 100 wildflower meadows back in the 1930s. Today, only 3 of them are left. It is one of the single biggest habitat losses the country has ever experienced. Now, to really get a feel for what this means on the ground, let's zoom in on one particular place. Our sources give us this fantastic case study from Sidmouth in Devon. And here, we can basically act like landscape detectives, reading the history that's written into the fields themselves. The plants themselves can tell you so much about the past. In this Sidmouth survey, they found that plants preferring neutral soil were everywhere. What does that tell us? It suggests that years and years of farming, adding things like manure, actually changed the soil's natural chemistry, leaving behind this clear agricultural fingerprint on the landscape. The survey also turned up this really fascinating little bit of nuance. Even plants we'd normally just call weeds can be really valuable. At one site, over a third of the plants were technically agricultural weeds, but they were still supporting a really healthy, thriving insect population. It just goes to show you, in nature, even a weed has its role. But despite all those losses, incredible pockets of diversity have managed to hang on. I mean, just look at these numbers from Sidmouth. Places like Combwood Farm and the Knoll are home to well over 100 different plant species each. These little fragments are like precious arks, holding on to all that biodiversity. And these 3 sites from the study, they tell the whole story perfectly. First, you've got the Knapp, which is an ancient remnant. We know it was never plowed because it has those rare fungi. Then you've got Alma Field, a recovering field. It was probably improved for farming once, but now, thanks to careful management, it's bouncing back into a beautiful wildflower meadow. And finally, there's Combwood Farm, which was a cattle farm until recently and is now a huge restoration project. It just shows you how these habitats exist across a whole spectrum: ancient, recovering, and brand new.
And this all brings us to a final, really thought-provoking idea that runs through all of our research. It's a kind of paradox that sits right at the heart of how we think about conserving these grasslands. So here's the paradox in a nutshell. The rich, flowery, buzzing habitats that we love so much aren't pristine wilderness. They're the direct result of a long, consistent relationship between people and the land. To put it simply, they need our help to survive. And this leads to a really fascinating question for our time. We hear a lot about rewilding, which is often seen as just stepping back and letting nature do its thing. But for these specific, human-shaped grasslands, is that the right move? Or is the best way to conserve them actually to practice a kind of informed stewardship, almost like gardening on a massive scale, to maintain the very conditions that created all their special biodiversity in the first place?
Yeah, there's no easy answer to that one. But it's definitely something to think about the next time you find yourself walking through a grassy field, now that you know a little bit about the secret history written in the landscape all around you. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.